The title of this sermon is Beyond Nationalism, and its subtitle, A Pentecostal Call to Worship. The title is drawn from the verses at Psalm 66, because Psalm 66 is actually a call to worship to the entire earth. You see it in the beginning words, make a joyful noise to God, all the earth. It is a call to worship to the whole earth. And as I pondered this psalm, I recalled a jingle for Coca-Cola that aired on television years ago, which featured people of different ethnicities singing, I'd like to teach the world to sing. See there? See there? See, you did hear it too. You did hear it too. It was a call to sing. And as I read this psalm, I thought about, I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. And I cheated now. I cheated, and I went to the Encyclopedia of Google and clicked on the clip so I could hear them sing the whole tune, and it was just as refreshing to me seeing them then. The thing I thought about was the difference between the imagery of that song and the way we now think of faith. That song and the opening words of Psalm 66 are a call to the whole world, to all the earth, to people who are from different places and different languages and different symbols and different prayer and praise and worshiping patterns. It is a call to people who are not one people because they all are in the same country, not one people because they all speak the same language, not one people because they all believe the same way, but they are one people because they are people of the same earth. And there is one God over the whole earth. We sing it as children, we got the whole world in his hands. And we had this jingle, I'd like to teach the world to sing. Now, of course, Coke came with that jingle to sell Coca-Cola products all over the world. Don't get it twisted, okay? Coca-Cola was not really thinking about global peace and harmony. They were trying to get their product everywhere that the various people of different places in the commercial looked. So this was a sales tool. The psalmist wasn't trying to sell anything, but the psalmist was trying to proclaim and announce an invitation to all the earth to praise God. We are invited to worship and sing praises to God for the awesome deeds we recognize. The psalmist realized that the whole world can recognize the awesomeness of God, the awesomeness of God's powers of deliverance and powers of salvation, powers of creation, powers of grace. The psalmist referred to the liberation of the Hebrew people at verse 6, where we read how God turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the river on foot, and there we rejoiced in him. Yet, this call to worship is not limited to the Hebrew people or to the ancient nation of Israel, because at verse 4 we read, all the earth worships you. They sing praises to you, sing praise to your name. And at verse 8 we find these words, bless our God, O people. Notice how inclusive that language is. Bless our God, O peoples. Let the sound of his praise be heard, who has kept us among the living and who has not let our feet slip. This call to worship was universal, not just communal, not just individual, not just national. It was a communal call to all people to worship God. As I read those words, the thought occurred to me, do we have enough moral generosity? Is our spirit big enough to invite all the world, all the earth, to worship God? Do we have a big enough heart to realize that all the earth are God's children? All the earth are God's children. That God's eyes keeps watch on all the nations, as we read at Psalm 66 and 7. If so, are we paying attention to this message at the end of verse 7? Let the rebellious not exalt themselves. There's that little warning there. In that call to worship, the psalmist stuck in a little warning. Let the rebellious not exalt themselves. And you know your preacher's crazy. And so in your preacher's crazy mind, this question jumped. What does a rebellious nation that exalts itself look like? And there it is then, verse 7. Let the rebellious not exalt themselves, after the psalmist talks about God's eyes keeps watch on the nations. If God's eyes keeps watch on the nations, what does it mean when we see this word, let the rebellious not exalt themselves? What does a rebellious nation look like in the eyes of God? I suspect it looks and sounds like what happened in Washington, D.C. last Thursday evening. You recall, Thursday was the 4th of July. You recall, Thursday evening, President Trump presided over what amounted to a political version of P.T. Barnum's Ringling Brothers Circus to observe the 243rd anniversary of the nation's independence from Great Britain. He delivered this speech full of boasts about American military power. It included a flyover of all these military aircrafts. He praised the courage and the service of men and women who serve in the armed forces. Called on young people to join the armed forces. Called on them to join the very armed forces he refused to join when he was of military age. What does it mean when a rebellious nation exalts itself? The president referred to the United States as an exceptional nation. He praised the founding fathers and boasted of the, quote, righteous American spirit that forged our glorious Constitution. And he spoke of, quote, love and unity that held together the first pilgrims and forged communities on the Great Plains, close quote. When I send out the manuscript, Suzette, I put a footnote to the text of the president's speech so in case anybody wanted to read the whole thing. Although what happened in Washington last Thursday was not billed as a religious service, nobody should be fooled. It was a brazen demonstration of worshiping national power. It didn't have religious overtones outwardly, but the people were called to worship the power of the nation and the power of the nation's military. The nation was invited to bask in the glory of military conquest without thinking about the moral and the ethical contradictions in Mr. Trump's speech, and the armed service personnel and the multi-billion-dollar props that he gave. He put on a party with multi-billion-dollar props. Every F-35 jet is a billion-dollar plane. Okay? You don't fly over a flight of Blue Angels without spending big bucks. So although it didn't say this is a religious service, it was a national call to worship the military. On this first Lord's Day after the service, let's not get caught up by the Kool-Aid. Because remember that verse in verse 7. His eyes watch the nations and let the rebellious not exalt themselves. Have we forgotten that the Great Plains were not forged in unity but by stolen from the Native Americans? Have we forgotten that the Cheyenne and the Arapaho and the Navajo and the Cochise and the Blackfoot people were all part of that Great Plains that we talk about, were forged in unity? No, that wasn't unity. That was conquest. Have we forgotten how the glorious Constitution that Mr. Trump mentioned in his speech deliberately excluded every woman, all black people, all the indigenous people, all unwealthy white men, all white men who didn't have property, from the promise of a more perfect union? Let the rebellious not exalt themselves. Have we forgotten that the call to worship that we read about in Psalm 66 is a far cry from the aggressive patriotism and the shameful contempt for other countries in Mr. Trump's speech? Unlike Mr. Trump, the psalmist in Psalm 66 recognized God. He recognized God. Mr. Trump ended his speech with the words, God bless you, God bless the military, and God bless America. However, the psalmist wrote at Psalm 66 and 8, bless our God, O people. Let the sound of his praise be heard. You see the difference? You see the difference? What happened in Washington last Thursday should be seen as a religious event because it involved a call to worship the nation. It involved a call to worship the nation and the nation's history of making itself, quote, great by doing war in the world. Judging from the speech and judging from the conduct of our nation, many people in our society believe that the conduct of this nation is determined best by its power by the military. There is little, if anything, in Mr. Trump's speech that acknowledge the humanity of the rest of the world. It was all about us. All about. Now, I understand when you have a birthday, the birthday party is supposed to be about you, but you should admit the other people in the family. You're not the only person in the family. When you have a birthday party, you are not the only person you celebrate. You're part of a family. And let's be clear, 243 years is not a long time for a nation. I mean, it's really young in the life of a nation. It's young in the life of people. And let's be clear, people who know anything about world history know there's nothing exceptional about the kind of thinking we saw last Thursday. The idea that might makes right is as old as history. From ancient history until now, the idea that might makes right has been the calling card and the insane delusion of every person or society that boasts of having stronger strength. Long before there were such things such as killer satellites and stealth bombers and F-35 fighter planes and submarines with nuclear missiles and soldiers and Marines with laser-guided weapons, thugs with clubs claimed that superior physical strength made them right. There's nothing exceptional about that kind of thinking, about believing that one is right because you have the latest and most deadly version of a club. And that's what we're talking about. We're right because we got the most clubs. Having the greatest arsenal of the latest and most deadly clubs isn't a sign of being right. It isn't a sign of being great. It isn't a sign of being exceptional. It simply proves that one has put ultimate faith in the ability to get one's way by amassing the power to bully others. Don't get it twisted. Being the most feared bully isn't proof that a person or society is right. It only marks that person or that society as the most dangerous version of a thug. And there's nothing right about being the biggest, baddest thug. There's nothing right about bragging about your thuggishness. There's nothing exceptional about a thuggish people claiming the power to be an empire. And there's nothing exceptional about being an empire. Remember, the Persians said the same thing, as did the Greeks, the Romans, the Spanish, the British, the Japanese, the Italians, the Germans, the Soviets. All those empires occurred in different places and across different periods, yet history teaches the same thing, that the same blind belief that doomed those other exercises of world domination will disappoint the American empire. You understand, one thing we've learned from history, there's always somebody else that can be a bigger thug. Every champ who always claimed that he was the latest version of greatest eventually got whipped by somebody else. And so there's nothing necessarily righteous and certainly nothing praiseworthy about claiming that we're the latest, greatest thug. There's nothing exceptional about being proud about it either. Hubris marks people and nations as fools, not as wise people. Instead, the psalmist calls on all people to bless God, not bless the nation, bless God. We are to bless God together as one humanity. We are to live before God together and in peaceful fellowship with God and with one another. God is the source of our common strength. God gives one oxygen to air the whole world. God gives one H2O to hydrate the whole world. The dirt is the dirt. the whole world over, and God gave it to us all. People who ignore that truth are rebellious. They forget that God is the source of our common strength, our common life. That our strength, our life doesn't come from military weapons. It doesn't come from armies and navies and air forces. People who ignore that are rebellious. And to use the words of Psalm 66 and 7, exalt themselves. Now, you may be wondering, why does this matter, preacher? Why should we be thinking about this on the first Sunday after the 4th of July? I'm glad you asked. Do you remember Adolf Hitler? Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime followed the same course of conduct in Germany that President Trump is undertaking in the United States. And just like people in this country aren't paying attention now, the German church didn't pay attention to Adolf Hitler. The German Christian community cooperated with, watched, stood at attention, and praised the patriotic overtures of the movement that Hitler led in 1933. Despite all the racist and the nationalist aspects, and he did it the same way that the so-called evangelical Christians are cooperating with and counseling and cheerleading the Make America Great Again movement. Now, I'm not talking about Republican and Democrat. I'm talking about the whole idea of notion that we're USA, 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 USA. Psalm 66 cautions against rebellious nations that exalt themselves. And that ought to be a warning to all of us, unless we don't believe that God can talk to us, unless we don't believe that God intends for us to pay attention to Psalm 66 and 7, unless we believe that we are somehow too right, too good, too big for Psalm 66 and 7 to apply to the USA. And so the question is, do we believe that God is big enough to speak to our nation? Do we believe that God is big enough to say, watch out now, you may be getting too big for your britches? Do we believe that God has a word of caution that applies to us? Can the Holy Spirit start a fire in us that invites all the earth to bless God, as opposed to call ourselves to say, look at us, look at how big we are, and get engaged in our chest beating? All nations are children of God, not just ours. We're neighbors of all people, and we are called to worship God as one people. And people in every time and place have been gullible. Yes, we, like everyone else, are gullible to the temptation to trust in our clubs, our sticks, our guns. There's nothing exceptional about being a nation that boasts in your military. Napoleon thought that way about the French. Mussolini thought that way about the Italians. Hitler thought that way about the Germans. Caesar thought that way about the Romans. Alexander the Great thought that way about the Greeks. People in every time and place have been gullible to trust in their clubs. And when they learned how to, instead of run with clubs but shoot arrows, they've learned to trust their arrows and their spears. And then when they develop wheels, they learn how to trust their chariots. And when they develop chariots that they put engines on, they learn how to trust their tanks. And they learn how to put engines in ships, they learn how to trust their ships. And they learn how to put bombs on planes, learn how to trust their bombs. Rather than honor God and do right by their neighbors. No, we don't wear the same kind of clothes around the world. Thank the Lord. Think of how the dull-looking world would be if everybody dressed the same. We don't all speak the same language. Think about how dull the world would sound if we all spoke with the same dialect. We are uniquely different. We yet share one thing in common. God has kept us all among the living. God has not let us slip. God has been our keeper, not the military. God intends that we see ourselves and behave as a worldwide community of one people from every nation. One people from many places, but one people. And in that sense, Psalm 66 is a Pentecostal call to worship, not Pentecostal in the sectarian sense, in the sense of tambourines and holy dances and speaking in tongues. Pentecostal in the sense of global, including everybody, Gentiles and Jews. It's a call to people from every religion. Folks who pray like us and folks who don't pray like us. It's a call to worship to people from every language, folks who speak like us and who don't speak like us, who use their verbs differently from we do. We're called to make a joyful noise, all the world, about the liberating goodness of God, not praise the deadliness of our militaries. And in that sense, Psalm 66 reminds every tyrant everywhere to come and see what God has done. He is awesome in his deeds. He turned the sea into dry land, and they passed the river on foot. That's a reminder to every tyrant, hey, you can be big as you want to. Don't forget what happened to the Egyptians. We sing it in our spiritual. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Oh, Pharaoh's army was a massive thing. But the old slaves reminded each other, God's still in the liberation business. God alone is keeping watch over the nations. Rebellious nations and their power-hungry rulers everywhere should not exalt themselves. I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Pharaoh's army got drowned in the Red Sea. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. I'd like to teach the world to sing. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Amen. says, I'm about to run out of things to play. I said, no, you haven't. No, you haven't.